Something deadly walks the Norfolk Southern Railway Trestle. Just outside the Highlands in Louisville, Kentucky, in a small area known as Popelick, named for the creek that runs under the old train bridge, a monster supposedly makes its home in the crags and crevices of the railway trestle. Though never rightfully cited or documented, the legend of the creature claims a body count so high that the official numbers remain unreleased. Tonight, we'll examine the legend of the Popelick Monster and discuss just what the Goatman may be, where it came from, the story's connections with further high strangeness in the area, and of course, just how the creature, or perhaps the spirit of the legend itself, has lured many to an unfortunate and untimely death on the tracks of the Norfolk Southern Railway Trestle. Additionally, we'll take a look at just how the legend of the Popelick Monster relates to other Goatmen sighted around America, as well as throughout time and history around the world. Prepare yourself for Kentucky strangeness of the highest order, and most importantly, stay off the tracks, as Midnight in Kentucky investigates the deadly legend of the Popelick Monster. Welcome to Kentucky,
the birthplace of Abraham Lincoln and built on the largest cave system in the known world. The home of Daniel Boone, Hunter S. Thompson, horse racing, and bourbon.
But when the hour grows late, the bluegrass state becomes the breeding ground for realms beyond those familiar to the human race. In the east, ghosts, spirits, and ethereal entities roam the hills and hollers.
In the north, Mothman beats his wings along the banks of the Ohio River.
To the west, small green creatures stalk farmhouses and disappear without a trace when shot.
While in the south, the energy of the Veiled Witch is palpable just over the border. Joining with us as we investigate just what goes on in the bluegrass night.
And ask the question, how many coincidences are too many? There's no need to check the clock.
There's no need to check the clock. Time is an illusion.
Time is an illusion.
And it's midnight.
It's midnight. In Kentucky.
In Kentucky. In Kentucky.
In Kentucky. In Kentucky. In Kentucky. In Kentucky. Ladies and gentlemen, the full moon has risen once again, and it is the midnight hour. For Midnight in Kentucky, I'm Ben.
I'm Steven.
Tonight, we are talking about one of Kentucky's most well-known cryptids. Oddly enough, a entity which has no confirmed sightings, but whose presence has led to many different deaths or killings, depending on how you look at the legend. But before we get into that, as always, if you would, please follow us on social media. We are on
Twitter,
Facebook,
MidnightKentucky.com,
and the Ransom Letter Publishing YouTube. And in addition to all of our old haunts where you can hear the podcast, you can now hear us on the Ransom Letter Publishing podcast stream as well. You can still hear us on the website, on Spotify, on SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. But you can also hear us over on the Ransom Letter Publishing podcast stream and hear the new addition to the Ransom Letter Publishing podcast family, the Ransom Letter Publishing podcast. Check that out. It gets into some weird territory. If you thought this stuff was weird, it may or may not get a little weirder. So check that out. And you can hear Midnight Kentucky over there. So be sure to check out the Ransom Letter Publishing podcast stream. And if you're looking for Midnight in Kentucky merch, check out the TeePublic. We've got hats, beanies, hoodies, t-shirts, everything like that, all kinds of designs. We have Kentucky Serious Werewolf Problem shirts over there from the last episode. We've got the Midnight in Kentucky logo. Whatever you guys want, we got it. And hopefully there will be a couple more designs coming soon. And we also have the new Patreon. Bonus episodes over there. Exclusive Midnight in Kentucky merch. All kinds of stuff going over there. A lot of different tiers to choose from. You know, you can start out on the $3 tier by buying us a coffee, or you can go all the way up to, I think, the $30 tier, where you get a new Midnight in Kentucky t-shirt once or 4 times a year, a sticker once a month, and all the bonus episodes that we put out. So check that out. We've already got some new patrons over there. We're very, very grateful for you guys. But back to tonight. Tonight, we are talking about the one and only Popelick Monster. We had an interesting time in this investigation. We found out a lot, and there were several things that you brought to my attention that I just didn't notice that you had dug into.
Yeah. There's several things. When I started looking at the story, as we go through the episode, I'll get into it more detail. But I kind of want to get to the root of the story, how it started, and then find information about those little details about how it started, just to get a little bit more information and background on the subject. And man, we did find out some very interesting details. That's for sure.
There are a lot of synchronicities with this case that I was not expecting going into it that just kept popping off as we kept investigating.
Yeah, it seems like the deeper you dive into these stories, the more information you find, and then the more kind of the narratives or origins, or even just the story itself kind of shifts and changes, and you kind of see it, how it formed to what it is modern day. It was very interesting to kind of do a little deep dive and I guess not reverse engineering it, but going through and working it from the beginning up to current date.
Right, right. So let's take it from the top. The Popelick Monster is probably the only, I imagine, the only entity or paranormal happenstance that we will ever talk about that has no confirmed sightings. There are, from my understanding, no confirmed sightings of the specific creature. That's not to say that multiple different types of entities and different types of weirdness have not happened in the vicinity of Popelick and of the Highlands area of Louisville, because as you and I know, multiple mutilations, animal mutilations have occurred there. There's been several Dogman sightings. So, it's definitely a strange area. A lot of UFO sightings. But as far as the Popelick Monster proper goes, no confirmed sightings have ever taken place. But and if anybody's listening who has saw the Popelick Monster, please write in, get with us. We'd love to hear your sighting. But as for in our research, and I think you agree with this, we couldn't find any confirmed sightings of this creature.
Yeah, I could not find any confirmed sightings of the creature itself. And a lot of people had stories of it, and there's a lot of discussion of it here in Kentucky, especially different times of the year. There's various radio shows that's on, statewide, that's well known. They discussed it. There's podcasts in the state that has discussed it. There's podcasts like ours that have brought it up and discussed it. And I think there's even like a short documentary on it out there on the internet. Well, I guess one thing we probably need to preface with people not, having no reported sightings is there's have been numerous deaths,
Yes.
for people trying to seek it out. And, I guess before we go much further in the podcast, we got to remind our listeners that, don't go out to Popelick and get on the train tracks. It's a very busy train, multiple runs, every day and at night. And there's been people who have died and died recently within the last 2 or 3 years, because they've got on the train tracks. And once you get on there, there's nowhere where to go except jump off or get hit by the train. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, so we got to kind of preface our discussion with that and say, please be, just kind of think and don't go out there, type thing.
Absolutely. And that brings up an interesting point. There have been uncountable deaths. The death toll is at this point uncounted. But as we will get into in just a second, one of the Norfolk Southern Railway workers counts as many as 43 collisions on the bridge, and that's just one worker. So you can imagine how many others there have been, and only so many make the news, I feel like. And in a way, I feel like that death toll is kept secret for different reasons, which I absolutely respect. But as you were saying, There have been many deaths caused by this creature. I suppose first we should introduce the creature itself to those who may not know the legend of the Popelick Monster. The Popelick Monster is supposedly a half man, half goat, maybe sheep, that is reported to live underneath a railroad trestle bridge over the Popelick Creek in the Fisherville neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky, in the Highlands area of Louisville. It is, it's standard half man, half goat appearance. Bottom half goat, legs, hooves, upper half, more humanoid. It's reported to have horns coming out of its head, sometimes reported to carry a bloody axe that it chases people with. Its eye color is reported, as black, yellow, red. And of course, all of this is in different legends. None of this comes from actual reports. There are no reports like, in Sasquatch or different entity encounters that we can say it happened on this date at this time and was seen by these people. There are no reports like that for the Popelick Monster. There are other half man, half or goat humanoid creatures, I'm going to refer to them as humanoid goats in Kentucky that have those types of sightings, and we'll talk about those a little later. But there are no confirmed sightings of the Popelick Monster proper. As Stephen was saying, many people have been hit and killed by trains on the Norfolk Southern Railway train trestle running over Popelick Creek, where the Popelick Monster supposedly hides underneath. Do not go on to the train trestle. That is extremely dangerous. You will not survive it. You cannot outrun a train. Many people have tried, and it's been very unfortunate that we've lost those people. So do not go on to the Norfolk Southern Railway train trestle. Not a good idea. We want to send our condolences out to all the families who have lost people in the search for this creature. It's a very terrible thing. But that being said, the legend of the Popelick Monster supposedly originated, and this is what I found. The earliest reports of the creature go back to the 1950s in the Popelick area, where a Boy Scout troop was camping in the area and was attacked by something screaming at them. So they ran and hid in a cave until morning, which I think is interesting. There's the caves again, which I'm sure we'll get more deeply into in this episode, no pun intended. But the caves definitely, as we've talked about 100 times over with Hellier, with Pennyroyal, with all the stuff happening in Somerset, caves are important to the phenomena for some reason. So these Boy Scouts hid in this cave until morning and could still hear this thing screaming at them and grunting and trying to find them. Most of the reported sightings, according to different podcasts I've listened to, and like Stephen said, that's where I've gotten a lot of my information from. We've kind of amalgamated, different sites and different podcasts who have done research, and I'll include all of those in the show notes. Much respect to the people who did the research and presented it, but all those will be in the show notes. But most of the reported sightings, and of course, maybe those have been lost to time. Maybe those are just an oral sightings, that were reported over time. But most of the reported sightings did occur during the 1950s. And the creature was never seen up close in these sightings, but always seen in a distance howling and crying. And like I mentioned a few minutes ago, in the Highlands area of Louisville, there are multiple types of entities that have been reported over the years, from this goat-like being to white-furred Yeti-like creatures, like the Barilla that we spoke about on the last episode, like several different Sasquatch-like creatures that have been reported all throughout Kentucky. There are multiple types of entities reported in this area. Just because we have no actual sightings of the Popelick Monster does not mean there aren't confirmed sightings, or at least recorded sightings, of different entities like Sasquatch, like, these different things, and lots of UFOs. There are lots of UFOs reported in this area. And if I'm thinking correctly, the llamas and the donkeys that were mutilated in Louisville a few years back, that occurred in the Highlands area, didn't it?
It did, yeah. It occurred in the Highlands area, and it's just I think I remember right. It's like walking distance from the zoo itself. That's something we discussed.
Yeah, yeah. So, but you were saying the Highlands area and the Popelick Trestle are about 20 minutes from each other, right?
Yeah, it looks like one I'm looking at, the Highlands area is kind of in the inner part of Louisville, and then on the outer edge of 265 is where the Popelick trestle is at. So it's kind of on the outer rim of Louisville as you're looking at the loop of 265.
Right, right. Okay, but still, man, that is a pretty big. I mean, the llama slaughter, the fact that the llama slaughters and the Popelick monster and the Dogman and the Sasquatch all supposedly exist in this 20-mile space of each other. Something's going on in the Highlands area of Louisville.
Yeah, and I want to say there was some more stuff that happened maybe in Shelbyville during the same time.
Yeah,
And this
there
is
was
4 years ago when we first started the podcast.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The mutilations were one of the reasons we started the podcast.
Right.
There was an occurrence in Shelbyville, if I'm thinking correctly. That was the woman who saw the two dog men like creatures walk around the side of her house and on down the street.
Right, right. And actually Shelbyville there is in the vicinity of, the public trestle. I mean, it's a little ways out from it, but also then you got Waddy, Kentucky, just
Right,
down the road from Shelbyville.
right. And of course, all those, like we talked about on the last episode, are canid type entities. But as we will get into, it does seem like canids, Sasquatch, the inhumanoids, as Barton Noonley calls them, they are related to each other somehow.
It does seem like when you start looking at the locations of these sightings or these stories that people have told throughout time, it seems like the creature kind of goes back and forth to what it would be, either like a canid creature or even like a goat-like creature. It seems like it changes, but the story is still relatively the same.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Another interesting thing that I found when I was doing research on the Popelick monster is, and you mentioned this before the show a little bit, is that on the bridge, the acoustics of the bridge, and I had actually heard this on a podcast, and you probably listen to the same podcast I did. I think it's Kentucky Histories. I don't know. I'll find it. I'll include it in the show notes. The girl who did it was excellent. A lot of good information on there. Um, but I'll include all that in the show notes, and I highly suggest people go listen to those. But the acoustics on the bridge, when you're actually on the bridge, totally prevent you from hearing the trains that are coming onto the bridge. Which, again, I'm going to take this opportunity to say, do not go onto the Norfolk Southern Railway train trestle, because you will not hear the train that's coming, and there's no way that you'll survive. Or that you can outrun it. But I thought that was interesting, that the acoustics on the bridge actually prevent you from hearing the trains.
I have heard that also on the same podcast, and then also on other podcasts that was kind of, saying that you can't hear it until it's on top of you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's even coming from, one person two people was on the bridge, and one of them actually was able to jump down and hang on to the bridge. Like, if you've ever seen the movie Lost Boys,
Mm-hmm.
he held on to it like Lost Boys style
Yep.
until the train passed, and then he was able to pull himself back up. Unfortunately, the person with him did not make it, and she died, because of the train. But I'm going to also say that I think they have cameras now because of that incident alone, of the most recent one that was like in 2019.
Oh, I'm sure.
Um,
Yeah.
they have cameras up now, and they have made well aware that you will be arrested if you're caught near the train tracks or on them.
Right.
going out there. But yeah, it seems like, and even that person there said they did not hear it until it was already on the bridge.
And if I'm not mistaken, those two people were legend trippers, cryptid hunters. They had had a reservation for Waverly Hills the day before, so they were actually out there looking for the monster.
Yeah, that's the way I understood the story. Also, they were like cryptid hunters. They was kind of doing the tour of Louisville, seeing the sights and seeing the story places that we have around here of cryptids and the hauntings, and unfortunately it did it went very bad.
Yeah, I think they had actually said the guy who, and I'll include the story in the show notes, but I think it said the guy who hung over the side of the bridge was a martial arts instructor. So it just so happened that he had extreme upper body strength to be able to hold onto the bridge, and that no person without training would ever be able to do that. But he also was charged with felony trespassing and complicity to slow a train car, which I think is a law that was used back in the day to prevent like Jesse James style bank robberies. But he got it. He's pressed with felony charges on that, and not only that, but of course, watching someone you love die. He is now has like severe PTSD, depression, anxiety, is taking meds for all that. But so yeah, some intensely life-changing penalties for going up on the bridge.
Yeah, and I think there's like a story, maybe the Courier Journal did, or one of the news agencies there out of that area. Did a story with him, and he's warning people, kind of as we are, don't attempt to go out there. Don't, even if you feel compelled for some reason, don't do it. Just think twice before you start out that way.
Well, man, it's interesting that you use that word compelled because uh, throughout my research into the Popelick Monster, I've kept coming back to, and you probably saw this yourself in all those podcasts. I kept coming back to uh, the monster using a form of hypnosis to lead its victims onto the Popelick Trestle. Not only that, but there were stories about a mimicking of voices, like someone that you knew or someone that you love calling you out onto the train tracks, or calling you out there like they're in trouble or something like that. Now, you and I have heard those stories constantly throughout our work and our research. That's very Fey-like. Again, it's talked about in Hellier. It's talked about throughout countless ghost stories throughout time. And that goes right back to legends of the Fae, and how in medieval times these creatures would use baby crying and lure people out into the forest, and they would disappear into the land of the Fae, or they would be killed or something like that. So it's pretty interesting that not only can you not hear the train when you're on the bridge, but there is this connection to this creature using some form of hypnosis, and this Fey like trick of mimicking voices to possibly lure its victims out onto the train track.
Yeah, that's kind of where I got the compelled verbiage from, is from the stories that I read. And although there's no eyewitness, there are multiple stories of that, of being like something drawing them, or even hearing someone's voices. You were saying, I read a couple of them that mentioned that. And of course, the people who have been killed, um, we don't know what drove them to go out there, outside of curiosity, or possibly, you know, what some of the people who had actually went out there and was fortunate enough not to encounter a train. So that's very interesting that those people all mention the same thing, although their stories are kind of hard to find. So it ain't like someone, read it and then went out there and assumed, hey, I'm hearing the same thing this person did. Because, those are pretty buried in the, when you start researching this, they're pretty hard to find.
Right. And before we go on, I do think it's interesting that there is no confirmed list of the deaths caused by, or the deaths on the Norfolk Southern train trestle, because that's, to me, that's a lot like not keeping a record of the people who have disappeared in national parks. What is the reason not to have that number? I feel like it would only go to strengthen the argument not to go onto the bridge if people would understand how many people have died going on the bridge. So, I'm not saying that there's a conspiracy, but I do think it's interesting that we don't have those numbers and that there's never a number mentioned when we're talking about these things.
For me, I'm wanting to say I have to look this up and find an actual statement on this. But this goes back to something, it's a similar reason why they don't allow to report that in the national parks. It's something to do with the railroad, since it's like, like a national type thing. There's not a law that they don't release those numbers for some reason. And I won't say it's probably one of those outdated laws. You know how sometimes things just stick around and they never change it. And it's some type of that dates back maybe to the days where people were commonly like sometimes people would like sleep on the railroad tracks and they just get killed. Back in this is talking like back in the 1800s when railroads were first put in and things. So it may be something like that, but I do find it odd that they don't release those numbers. And and even with the national park thing, those numbers are not released. And I feel like if there is a law preventing that, that's data that I think would be helpful not only to kind of what we look at, but also just the safety of railroads in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. For me, not being able to find the numbers goes to that story that I've told you off the air. And I guess it's okay to reveal this story at this point, but I made a call to the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife a while back to ask about the mutilations we were talking about earlier. And I kept getting blown off until eventually I spoke with an officer, and he basically told me that they had nothing on it, no documents. When me and you both know that that's not the truth. We know that there are documents on it and that there was an investigation on it. So it, maybe it's just that they don't want to face these things when there's deaths involved, because, like we talked about last week on the Dogman episode, there are potentially there's definitely some animal deaths involved and some animal mutilations, but there's the possibility that there were human deaths involved. And here with the Popelick Monster, even though he's never been seen in person or seen in person and recorded on record, there are a lot of deaths involved.
Yeah, I mean, when I started looking at it, I was kind of shocked at how many there has been, which I knew of maybe a couple, but I wasn't aware of how long this has been going on. And, the numbers kind of have been out there. Once you start looking at it, it's like, wow, that's definitely a problem of, people going out there and looking for the Popelick Monster and end up getting hit by a train, which that's why we have said multiple times, in the course of this podcast, don't go out there, even if you feel compelled or, you feel like it's safe or anything. And because you're risking your life, risking the life of people with you. But also, if you get caught out there, you will face penalties such as jail time and, fines and things like that that would not be pleasant.
Right, right. And that brings me perfectly into this little bit of this article that I wanted to read, talking about victims, those who have died feeling compelled to be out on the tracks, and talking about the numbers of deaths that the Norfolk Southern Train Trestle has seen. This article is called Popelick Monster Mythical, Dangers Real. It was written by Beth Warren, and it was in the Louisville Courier Journal. I'll include a link to it in the show notes so you guys can read this in full if you want to. But I just want to read 2 paragraphs from this, something that I thought was morbidly interesting because it is very, very tragic. But it says this. During his 34 years with Norfolk Southern, Gentry said he was involved in 43 collisions. Gentry is one of the train engineers who worked on the Norfolk Southern Railway. It talks a little bit about Gentry earlier on in the article, but for all intents and purposes, Gentry was an engineer on this railroad. So during his 34 years with Norfolk Southern, Gentry said he was involved in 43 collisions. One was a suicide. He said he saw the man step on the track and lay down in front of him. Gentry said similar incidents, either serious or fatal collisions, have caused some of his fellow engineers to stop going over the Popelick Bridge. Some took jobs in the yard because of the trauma they experienced, he said. You see it happening in front of you. There's absolutely nothing you can do. Nothing you can do, he said, but pull the emergency brakes and pray. So Gentry was involved in 43 collisions alone, one of which does seem to be a man who simply stepped out on the tracks and laid down in front of the train. And suicide is rampant. Suicide is a terrible, terrible virus in America and around the world. But, why would someone choose the Popelick Bridge of all places to commit suicide? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that seems to be, and I wonder how many of the 43 were, I mean, it could be a mixture. It could be a mixture of suicides, but why would they choose that place? Also, it could be people out just walking around saying, hey, I'm going to go over and look off this bridge,
Sure.
And see the view, and then not realize that the railroad is still active.
Right. I don't think a lot of people realize that the railroad is still active. And if we haven't said it enough, there are trains that pass on this thing every single day, multiple times. Do not go up there.
Yeah, right. I think that's definitely something we'll have to keep pressing on in this podcast and be, we hate to be repetitive about it, but there's been so much death. There's been, there was 43 people who have died.
And that's just one engineer. Think about that. That's right. Just one guy who worked there. So,
and that's the part where you're like, this story alone, I'm not saying the story is responsible for all 43, but the bridge itself has had, at least 43 people die on it, and that's from one engineer, as Ben was saying.
Right.
And over time, that's, it seems like it's one of those things like, I think they need more, like, maybe put it out there and be like, hey, please start coming or put something up to where people can be reminded. Like, like how this is something I remember when I traveled a lot before the pandemic. Tennessee has these signs on the interstate, and it says, like, this amount of people have died on Tennessee highways as of this year, and last year's number was this at this time. And it was a reminder as you're going down the interstate, like, and I would see that number tick up, as I traveled starting in January, and then, by December, that number would be 600 or 700 or more. And it's like, wow, they really kind of got your attention and made you like, okay, I need to pay more attention to the road when I'm driving and, be more careful, maybe even slow it down. And I think maybe they need something there, to remind people, like, this is how many people died here. Don't walk out here. And maybe that would be enough mental catch to say, hey, I'm not going to stay here on the side and look for it, and I'm not going to go out on the bridge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, unfortunately, I do think that there's more that the railroad company could do to prevent the deaths. But that being said, that goes back to that numbers thing, man. If they were to put something up like that, which I think is an excellent idea, they would have to admit to the numbers of deaths that have occurred there.
Right. I mean, we report the deaths on the roadways. I don't think Kentucky has signs like that, but I know Tennessee does, and there's another state I've been to that has similar signs. And I think that's something they need to put up and you're right, they would have to release the data, but also that would probably prevent future incidents of this occurring. And if they want it to stop, you know, I think that's probably one of the ways you could get it to stop.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, so unlike a lot of the things that we talk about, a lot of the cryptids we talk about, the Popelick monster has taken on more of a legend status. It's one of those stories that's out there in the ether. There's really no confirmed sightings of the thing, but it's taken on this almost mythical like status. And with a mythic like status, unlike Sasquatch or unlike the river monsters or the various or the dog man or things like that, there are origin theories about why the Popelick monster exists. And there's multiple origin theories, many of which, like we talked about at the top of the show, intertwine and bring coincidences back and forth between each other. There's a Wave 3 news article that I'm just want to read a brief amount from, and then we'll jump into all the origin theories that they talk about in the article. And I know that you found some interesting origin theories as well that kind of connect. So I'm excited to get into those. This story is called Numerous Urban Legends Tell of Louisville's Goatman. It was written by Don G., published on May 10th, 2014. It's on Wave 3's website. I'll include it in the show notes. I'm just going to read this little part here from it. Lots of interesting stuff in this article. It says, numerous urban legends exist about the creature's origins. One tale, Dominique explained, the Goatman arose as a tale of a local farmer back in the day, tortured a herd of goats for Satan and signed a contract with him and forfeited his soul. In the process, he was converted into this terrible creature that was sent to live under the trestle seeking revenge on people. Another popular legend Dominique shared claims a circus train was crossing the trestle one day and it derailed, and in one of the cars there was a kind of circus freak. Whether it is a farmer who made a deal with the devil or a so-called circus freak seeking revenge, there is one thing everyone agrees on when sharing tales about the Goat Man, and that's what he looks like. Dominique slowly described the beast. The legs are muscular and covered with coarse dark hair. He's got the same dark hair on parts of his body. His face is alabaster, and they say he has horns as well. The legends don't just stop at his gruesome features, but also focus on the methods he employs to claim his victims. Narratives claim he also has powers to draw you to your death by either hypnosis or voice mimicry. There's the hypnosis and voice mimicry again. The Goatman supposedly is a very sly creature, and he does all kinds of things to try and trick you into going up onto the trestle. He's been known to mimic the voice of children who are calling for help, stressed Dominique. Once you climb on the tracks, there's no way to escape death from an oncoming train. Dominique removed the smirk from his face and gets serious as he explained it's a very dangerous location. Many people think that the trestle is not used, but trains cross here every day. There have been a number of deaths and accidents at the trestle since its construction, although signs tell thrill seekers to keep out. Dominique explained in the late 80s, a movie was made by local filmmaker Rod Schlichneck. Other people have come out here and done documentaries. He's appeared on several national networks and documentaries and programs about strange creatures and hauntings across the United States. The legend of Kentucky Bigfoot is alive and strong today, but Dominique stressed about this creature. Kentucky Sasquatch, that's a whole other thing from the description from people who have seen him. It doesn't sound like the same thing at all. The strange accounts still pour into this day. So, lots of different stuff there. And I like that mention that, the Goatman and the Sasquatch are two separate entities.
Yeah, I liked how he put that out there that they are two different entities or two different stories. And as with any of these type of stories, as they get passed on through the years, it seems like they intertwine. But I'm glad he kind of separated them. That was good to kind of say they're two different things.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, as we talked about in there, there's a couple different versions of the Goatman's origins. There is the circus freak, which we'll get to here in just a second, because there's a lot to that theory and a lot of synchronicities there. But there's also, the farmer who supposedly sacrificed a goat to Satan and signed a contract to sell his soul, which is only a variation on one of the more nastier theories, that the goat man is a product of bestiality with some type of goat farmer. But there's that farmer theory that, whatever happened with the farmer, whether he's sacrificing it, whether he's fucking it, whatever's going on, that the goat man somehow sprang from that. What's your thoughts on that theory?
Oh yeah, so as I was looking at that story, I looked at property deeds. I couldn't really find much because property deeds sometimes are locked down and you got to pay, and but that's definitely an interesting origin story, especially the whole bestiality thing, which is kind of like, I don't know which one come first, the Satan deal or the bestiality deal. It seems like it's the same story, but somehow someone really worked it up at one point, and I'm supposed the bestiality thing comes second to it, because that seems like something that it isn't really. I haven't really heard that in any other of these top stories of these origins of these cryptids, but definitely it's the deal of Satan and the farmer down there and having the goats and things in that area is possible, because there is a lot of farmland down there in that area, and that one definitely, I think, has some originality to it, and it's. But you have to think about, did it say what year um that he maybe lived down in there?
No, the farmer theory, again, it's more just like a legend.
Yeah.
I do think, though, there is an interesting connection between like satanic, and I use the word satanic very, very loosely because Satanism is not what we think it is. It's not, Satanism proper. And the satanic panic back in the 80s should have shown us something that we get carried away with ideas like that. Well, I mean, shit, to go on a crazy sidebar, that's kind of what this whole Q thing has done recently, right?
Yeah. It's
But
just the satanic panic rewrapped is all it is,
exactly,
as a new gift
exactly,
to society.
right, a new gift to society. It's interesting how the phenomena plays off human emotions. And I say that because in the original days of the satanic panic, we had a lot of UFO sightings, a lot of cryptid sightings, a lot of different things that I feel are legitimate. But I also feel like, the more we get into this, and you and I talk about this a lot, we're not dealing with, or at least I don't feel, and this may upset some people in the paranormal community. So we're just pissing off everybody tonight. But I don't feel like what we're dealing with is flesh and blood entities. I don't feel like we are dealing with lost civilizations of creatures that make their homes in our woods. I don't feel like we're dealing with aliens from space. I feel like whatever we're dealing with, it's all the same thing. It's all the same phenomena. And that phenomena plays off of us. Like, it plays off of our emotions. It plays off of our fears. It plays off of our joys, even. I think that's why some people describe horrible encounters with these things, and some people describe enlightening encounters with these things. And we'll get into this deeper in the episode, because this actually kind of goes to my whole connecting theory with the Popelick Monster. But I definitely think the phenomena plays off of us. So if we have these things, these fears about, Satanists killing our animals and stuff, that's not to say that something isn't happening. Kind of like you said with the sheriff in Monroe County, maybe he did have that belief that it was something satanic, but that still doesn't negate the fact that something happened. You know what I mean? Something happened there. So it's interesting how, something happens and then we spin it. And also how, back to this trickster idea with the paranormal, how the paranormal plays off of us and plays off of those emotions. and kind of wants us to freak out in that way sometimes. And other times, I heard somebody recently, I think it was on the Skinwalker Ranch theory or the Skinwalker Ranch show on History Channel, describe the phenomena as a little kid who is tugging at you, wanting you to play with it. And sometimes that game is, uh, picking flowers and and enhancing your view of reality. And sometimes that game is scaring the shit out of you.
Right, right. And it was interesting you brought up like the emotion part of it. It also plays off of like the preconceived notions that the people who's investigating it has. Like if the sheriff is, let's say on, the side of believing in the satanic panic and believing in such things as that. And then when he looks at this, he's only seeing everything from the satanic panic point of view. He's not seeing it from,
Right.
Even if it was dogs, I'm not saying it was, but he's not even seeing it from that point of view, which the fish wildlife officer is seeing it from that side. There's not like anybody involved in that investigation or into that, looking at that with just looking at the facts of what's happened, the evidence, and going from there. And unfortunately, a lot of the evidence is not available to the common Joe to go look at it. But that ends up a lot of times when you run into these oddities and these things that happen that can't be explained. The people who investigate them have a lot of preconceived notions, and they allow those to, you know, weave their opinion and weave how they're going to investigate it. And I'm not saying, they're bad investigators. Everybody's guilty of it. You and I are guilty of that.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I definitely think, and I went way off the rails here. No pun intended. But
well, allow me to bring it back on the tracks for you, because I definitely think that you're onto something here, and I definitely think that this all connects. Because ultimately, I think that you and I both agree that the goat farmer sacrifice bestiality craziness is a remnant of that satanic panic thing. Yeah. And that's not to say that a lot of investigators into the Popelick Monster do not believe that that's what the Popelick Monster is. And that's all well and good. Just like, with so-called alien cases, the aliens play into that. Whatever the aliens are, they play into us thinking that they're from space. You know what I mean? So I think maybe if you encountered this creature, that it would play into that whole fear that it was satanic and a product of Satanism. But just like you said, investigators are hindered, and this is a John Keel thing. Belief is the enemy. Investigators are hindered oftentimes by their beliefs in things like the satanic panic or and they won't go beyond and see all the coincidences that we're about to talk about with this case, simply because they're like, oh well, it's a beast of Satan, which I'm not saying it's not. I don't know what the fuck this thing is, but I think, and I think you agree with me here, that origin theory is kind of a remnant of the satanic panic, which only served to do a lot of injustice to a lot of people that it shouldn't have happened.
Right. And I agree. And I think it was like, and a lot of these Satanist stories get brought up. I remember, and this is talking about our area here. And I remember when I was a kid in maybe grade school even, and people were talking about there was like a Satanist out on Highway 55 going towards Camelsville, between Camelsville and Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, Satan worshippers are out there, and there's a pentagram. And what it really was turned out to be was there was an old Texaco station, and if anybody remembers, the Texaco, it had like the star. And I remember seeing it, and I remember thinking, that's not Satanist, that's a Texaco star thing.
Dude, that is awesome.
And that's kind of what some, and I'm, and maybe that's how some of these things get construed and started. And then, as we go through the Popelick Monster here, we're going to kind of discuss maybe how some of these stories get bits and pieces from other things that's happened, and get brought in to the legend itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the next origin story that we have is and I'll just briefly hit on this one because I want to bring this one back up. There's not a lot of information that we have on it at this time, so I'll just briefly hit this one. It's a chemist living as a recluse after an experiment had gone wrong. That's one of the theories that is believed to be a product of the Popelick Monster. But before we get to the big one, before we get to the circus freak one, which was where you and I found a lot of weird synchronicities, I want to bring up the movie real quick. The movie is called The Legend of the Popelick Monster. It was released in 1988. It was 16 minutes. It cost $6,000, and the film premiered on December 29th, 1988, at the Uptown Theater. Most of the film was shot at the Popelick Trestle, but scenes showing the characters up on the trestle were shot at another safer location. The Norfolk Southern Railway lost their shit about this, as maybe they should have, but made them release a statement at the beginning of the film saying what we've been saying all night: don't fucking go up there. But here's an interesting little thing about the Legend of the Popelick Monster. By the way, this movie is on YouTube. You can watch it. I haven't watched it yet. I'm gonna sit down tonight and finally watch this thing because it does look pretty interesting. I'll include it in the show notes for anybody that wants to watch it. The interesting thing about the Legend of the Popelick Monster is that it was made by a man who has a unpronounceable name, much like another unpronounceable name. Exactly like another unpronounceable name we are going to talk about in just a second. The name of this man, and I'm going to, like I said, totally fuck this dude's name up, is Ron Shieldneck. Ron Shieldneck. That Shieldneck name will prove interesting here in just a moment. And it's just another one of those coincidences that, honestly, man, I just realized reading through this thing. So not only did we have your synchronicity that we're about to talk about, but I literally just realized that Shieldneck is the same name as this fellow who we're about to talk about.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So that brings us to one of the biggest theories on the origin of the Popelick Monster, and that is that he is a circus freak, freed when lightning struck the train car carrying him, freeing him onto the Popelick train trestle. And I want to just briefly read this legend. This comes from LouisvilleHalloween.com, the Legend of the Popelick Monster. I will include this in the show notes. Check their website out. They're located in Louisville. But I want to read this because there are so many synchronicities here. So this is the Legend of the Popelick Monster.
In every urban legend, there is a cornerstone of truth, and every true story has a beginning. This story begins with a man who called himself Colonel Beauregard Shieldneck, although there is no record or evidence that he ever served in any regiment of the armed services or militia. Colonel Shieldneck was the owner and ringmaster of a traveling circus that performed across the heartland of America and into the deep South territories beginning in the early 1930s. Shieldneck's reputation was one of ill repute in the carnival business, and he was considered a liar, cheat, and all-around charlatan. His crew of carnies and circus clowns were more of a gang of cutthroats and pirates than sideshow entertainers, and every town they visited left behind a series of unsolved thefts, missing persons, and grisly accidental deaths. One thunderously stormy night, while stopped in a small town near Beltsville, Maryland, the circus's bearded lady, Madame Bristales, discovered an abandoned infant left in a hay-filled crate outside her tent. The child was severely malformed, with stubs protruding from its forehead and misshapen legs that ended in what looked more like cloven hooves than human feet. She took the poor creature in and gave it food and shelter. One look at the twisted abomination and Colonel Shieldneck knew that he had struck gold. He had found the starring attraction for his freak show that would make him rich beyond his wildest dreams. He took the child and raised it in captivity, never letting it out of his sight or its cage until it could fully be exploited for its grotesque appearance. The beast grew in size and strength over the years, its stubs becoming full-sized horns and its temperament as nasty as the treatment given to it by the cruel circus carnies charged with keeping it imprisoned. It spent most of its life chained to the wall of a cage inside a circus tent, whipped brutally daily to keep it subdued and submissive, and fed only gruel and leftover scraps from the midway vendors' grease pits. One fateful night, during a thunderstorm as violent as the one of the night of its birth, the circus train was passing through Fisherville on its way to a performance in Louisville, Kentucky, when a bolt of lightning struck the tracks, causing the train to derail just ahead of the trestle over Popelick Creek. The twisted wreck probably killed most of Shieldneck's crew instantly, but not all of them, since body parts were found as far away as 2 miles from the crash site. What is known for a fact is that the Goatman survived the tragic train wreck, finally set free from its life of fortune, exploitation, and imprisonment, and it took revenge on survivors by ripping them to bloody shreds. Colonel Shieldneck's body was never found, and it's suspected that a few of his cutthroat crew of clowns, circus freaks, and dangerous animals also may have survived the deadly accident but were never found. Due to the number of deaths, missing persons, deer and livestock mutilations, and Goatman sightings that have been reported in the ensuing years, there is good reason to believe the Goatman of Popelick never left the area. He is believed to have taken up residence in either an underground cave or ramshackle hut somewhere in the wooded area around the train trestle. His inbred hate of cruel humanity has made him a bloodthirsty and dangerous beast to be avoided at all costs. The Courier-Journal records at least 2 confirmed deaths in 1987 and 1988, and many injuries and close calls attributed to the Popelick Monster and his protected trestle. The trestle rises 90 feet above Popelick Creek and stretches 772 feet across to the other side. Although incapable of human speech, the Goatman is said to be able to mimic human voices and has been known to call out the names of those who have climbed to the top of the trestle in order to lure them out onto the tracks, just as an oncoming train is coming around the bend to seal their doom. On weekend nights during the month of October, and especially during the cycle of the full moon, the Goatman is said to be most active in the woods and hills surrounding the Popelick Trestle. Those who have attempted to drive beneath the trestle at the stroke of midnight have reported being chased by the beast, who can run at speeds of nearly 60 miles per hour, and more than one report has claimed loss of their car door handle or bloody claw prints left on their car door after the pursuit. In the mid-1970s, rumors of a satanic cult and demonic rituals began circulating in the same area along Popelick Road, and reports of missing dogs, cats, and other domestic animals were suspected of falling prey to the satanic blood ceremonies. A mysterious farm known as the Four Winds down the street a few miles from the train trestle was suspected of being owned by a group of Satanists who worshipped the Popelick Monster as the living embodiment of Baphomet, the goat of Mendes himself, a mocking image of the Lamb as the embodiment of Christ who died for the sins of humanity. The Four Winds farm was surrounded by a red and black painted fence through the 1980s and into the 1990s with a sign at the front gate warning, "Trespassers will be persecuted." Strange tribal drum beats and chanting were often heard in the woods behind the farm's barn. Another potential danger in the area is the group of angry farmers and residents who constantly suffer in fear of the monster's attacks on their livestock and families. Some of these residents should be considered armed and dangerous and might not take kindly to anything or anyone lurking about the area after dark. The legend of the Popelick Monster and the haunted railroad trestle it calls home have been passed down through the oral tradition and spread about over 3 generations of Louisville culture. Is it all myth and urban legend, or are some of the stories rooted in truth and local history?
So that's a very interesting story, and there's a lot there. We hear the name Shieldneck for the second time, which I find interesting, and I don't actually know if this story was created, to pitch maybe this haunted house in Louisville or this Halloween attraction in Louisville, or if this is believed to be an actual story. But regardless, the name Shieldneck showing up again as Colonel Shieldneck instead of the filmmaker of The Legend of the Popelick Monster, which came out in 1988,
is interesting. And it's interesting that there's that coincidence there. And honestly, this article, though, it does bring up that satanic panic aspect again, is full of little interesting tidbits. There is the full moon, which is associated most commonly with werewolf legends, which, as we see, as we've already talked about, the Highlands area of Louisville is associated with. There's also the missing dogs, cats, and other domestic animals, which this article paints as being part of a satanic cult. But you and I know that is a real phenomenon that happens in this area. That happens quite a bit, it seems, in this area. So there were a lot of interesting things there. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, see, it has a lot of aspects that has got told through time, especially during the Satanic Panic. And that movie was made, what you said, 85?
88, right in the middle of
88, right in the middle of the Satanic Panic. And it kind of added fuel to that. And yeah, there is a lot of, missing animals in that area and different things. And that's the part of the story where it adds, realism to it. But then, there's always this, it keeps on kind of going back to Satanist, in this story, and several origin stories. And maybe that's when this story kind of ramped up and kind of took on its form, was during the Satanic Panic. But that name, Shitnik, keeps on coming up. That's very, very interesting and intriguing that his circus keeps getting brought into this.
And Shilnek, and I know we're pronouncing that wrong, so anybody that has the correct pronunciation, please correct us. But Shilnek was the filmmaker, Ron Shilnek, of the 1988 Legend of Popelick Monster. So I think it's interesting that we have Colonel Shilnek here, and we have Ron Shilnek, the creator of the monster. And like I said, haven't watched the film yet. Maybe this is the plot of the Legend of Popelick Monster, and but there is a lot here. And I also want to say that Baphomet, the way they describe him is not exactly accurate, but we'll talk about Baphomet in a little bit. What did you think about the Four Winds Church? I feel like we've heard about that before, maybe.
See, I'm trying to think of where I've heard that from before.
That's interesting, though. I would like to dive more into the Four Winds Church because, regardless, I don't think they were Satanists, but it is interesting that there's this mysterious church only a few miles from the Popelick train trestle.
Yeah, and a lot of times, they're made of events of odd practices of, churches or organizations back then that did things. But I don't think it was on the scale of what the Satanic Panic was saying it was.
Right, absolutely.
And that's the interesting aspect of the story, because it's kind of like that quote I said earlier about the Q stuff. There's a little bit of truth to this legend, as we find out, but then it kind of makes some twists and turns, and you're like, okay, well, that's where this part of it come from. So it kind of makes you look at it a little bit more different. Like, okay, how did this exactly get to the point of where people's going out on the track trying to look for it? That's the part where I'm kind of like, wow, this definitely took some twists and turns. And it's kind of unlike the other stories we have in Kentucky that we've discussed and that we will discuss in the future, it's definitely one of the most interesting ones. And because there's a lot of deaths tied to it that's not related to the entity itself.
Right. And, going back to what we've mentioned several times, no confirmed sightings, many deaths. It very much is. I mean, even digging into the story and taking a look at all these different coincidences that the story brings up, it's very much that trickster deity. It's very much it feels like you're being fucked with by some entity the whole time you research this, because there's so many little roads that you go down and it dead ends, but then there's stuff like this where you find that supposedly the filmmaker that made the movie back in 88 is the same name as the Colonel. And not only that, but you discovered some stuff that is kind of mind-blowing that you should definitely tell us about.
Yeah, so when I started researching the Popelick Monster, I wanted to get to the origin, like the original sighting of it, which there was not any. But I wanted to get where the story began. So I found the most common one is the circus train derailment. And so I started looking, seeing if I could find out more about the circus and especially if I could find some type of newspaper article about the train wreck. And I cannot find anything that happened in public. However, ironically, there was a train wreck that contained circus cars in Paint Lake, Kentucky, and it happened in 1882, where 3 were killed, 15 were injured, and it was Sales Brothers Circus. And the articles that I have read, the train derailed in Paint Lake, Kentucky, which is across the state. It's over below Richmond, so it's pretty good ways from Popelick. And the descriptions of the train wreck is almost matching what Ben read there about the derailment there that supposedly happened at Popelick. The train did derail before it got to the bridge, the Paint Lake Creek Bridge. Circus performers were killed. The animals that were on there, such as lions and elephants and stuff, were allegedly loose. When the train wreck, they got loose, and they were eating some of the bodies, possibly maybe attributed to the death of some of the people who maybe survived the train wreck, but then was attacked by those wild animals, and they had to round up these wild circus animals at one point. And then, it kind of went like to the next day. There was like someone hit by the train the following day in the same spot, or like really close, like on the bridge, where the train wrecked previously to that. So I could not find anything on a train wreck of contained circus, folks in Popelick, but this Paint Lake train wreck has every aspect of it. It has this, circus train wreck. There's newspaper clippings from it, from 1882, and the death toll, people being killed, animals eating the survivors, which matches the description of what they're saying the Popelick Monster did, like foreign body parts and things like that. So somehow through time, which this happened in 1882, so somewhere, I guess, maybe, early 1950s, late 40s, somewhere or another, this story evolved over time and got changed to it happened in Popelick and not Paint Lake, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, and that's a hell of a coincidence, because we just told this story about this train wreck. So regardless, where it happened, we definitely have a train wreck that happened. We definitely know that it's historically documented that a train wreck happened. But it's in Paint Lick and not Popelick. Where exactly is Paint Lick? Is it anywhere around like Mount Vernon and the Livingston County area?
Yeah, Paint Lick is it's down below Richmond, and it's in, I guess, it's near the Kirksville community and Cartersville community. It's not that far off of I-75 between Richmond and Berea. But it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. But the train, tracks and stuff are through that area, and it's like a little community. Paint Lake does have a postal zip code, so it's got a post office out there, and that's about all it's out there. So it's like a little middle of nowhere town that this happened, and and it's kind of interesting to me because once I started looking into the circus train wreck that happened in Paint Lake, there was like tons of information on that.
Right.
That's like a well-known thing in that area. But then there's nothing other than the legend about the Popelick Monster, circus train wreck in Popelick. There's like no newspaper clippings. There's nothing and there's actually like train wreck data on the one in Paint Lick.
Right.
And and both of them have similar names. It's a something P Lick, and somehow the accident that happened in Paint Lick evolved into happening in Popelick,
Mm-hmm.
and then it kind of fit into the Popelick Monster story somehow. And what I'm real curious about is what come first: the circus train wreck in Popelick, or did the Satanist story come first?
Well, it's interesting, and we'll get into this in just a second as we talk about different Goatman sightings around Kentucky. But there is apparently a Goatman legend in Livingston County in Tyleen, Kentucky, that goes all the way back to the mid 1840s, and that's kind of around the same area we're talking. And it's interesting that there's also a Goatman legend there, and this one, seems to have a little more recorded instances than the Popelick Monster proper.
So, we said Tyleen, Kentucky. How do you spell that?
That is spelled Tiline, Tyline, perhaps. And I'm going to get shit for my pronunciation over that for everybody from Tyline or Tyleen, because apparently nobody believes I'm actually from Kentucky. So,
okay, that's out by Paducah.
so not the same area.
You're not the same area. That's out by the it's out in Paducah area. It looks like it's right outside Paducah.
Okay, cool.
Or outside Eddyville and Paducah. It's in that area. In between Lakes area, though.
Interesting. But it is interesting that there is this train crash in Paint Lick that is just like, that, like you said, sounds so similar to Popelick, and that somehow that got entwined into the legend of the monster. And it's a pretty major coincidence. Like, that's a pretty major coincidence. And another coincidence for you is the supposed train wreck that happened in Paintsville, Kentucky, caused by the UFOs.
Right. And that's interesting too, because that's kind of like a similar sounding thing. But I think the one in Paintsville, Kentucky, that happened like more modern times. When it wasn't like in the 1800s, or when was that?
No, this was the Paintsville wreck supposedly happened, I think, in the 60s, 70s, maybe even 90s. I need to do some better research into that. But again, we have some type of paranormal entity in a train crash, and Paint Lick, Paintsville. Maybe I'm grasping at straws here, but that's kind of weird.
Yeah. That's kind of. I know we have a lot of things here in the state with lick in the name. We have a lot of creeks, and I think that goes around to creeks or something. It's like another name for a creek or a top of a creek, that we had in the settler days. And then there's a lot of paints, and I don't know the actual, maybe that was the last name of someone who, like, early settlers in Kentucky, and some Kentucky history folks can probably point us in the right direction on that. But yeah, it seems like a lot of these things kind of, there's synchronicities in them, but they also kind of, you see how things intertwine as they grow. And I think that's interesting to kind of see. For me, looking at this story, it was fascinating to see how it kind of formed and evolved over time.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like getting a look at how a legend forms in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting how this, and I wish I could find more information on, kind of, as I was saying earlier, what come first, the Satanist story or the train wreck story, and then also kind of when it was first mentioned in Popelick,
right.
Maybe how it got there. It was pretty interesting, just kind of uncover some of that. And as I said, the Paint Lick train wreck is like well common knowledge out in that area. It seems there's a lot of people found a lot of articles on it.
Well, and it is interesting because there have been these Goatman legends around Kentucky for quite a while, or just these legends of creatures like the Goatman. Um, but another aspect of this, and again, I heard this on a podcast. I'll include all these podcasts that I took my research from in the show notes. Is an excellent podcast, and this is really interesting. Um, there were there was a man by the name of Charles Chess McCartney, and this is documented in a book named Goatman Flesh and Folklore by J. Nathan Couch. Charles Chess McCartney traveled up and down the eastern United States from 1930 to 1987 in a ramshackle wagon pulled by a team of goats. He was a vagabond from Iowa who dressed in goat skin and earned him the nickname Goatman. He traveled to all 50 states. He told his stories, and he sold postcards of his likeness. And it's documented that Charles traveled to Popelick many, many, many times. So, here we have another goat man that seemingly pops out of the ether. And it does seem like this Charles Chess McCartney guy was a pretty cool fellow. I mean, he rode around in a wagon pulled by goats, and it's also interesting that he traveled from 1930 to 1987, which the next year would have had the release of the Legend of the Goatman by Shield's Neck. So I thought the Charles Chess McCartney's play in this was interesting. What do you make of that?
That's the one I find most fascinating, just because as he traveled across the country with these, it seems like possibly, and I'm not saying we have any evidence to back this up, but it's possible as he traveled throughout the country on these trains that this legend maybe followed him to these different locations, and it was kind of like, hey, the Goatman's coming to our town type thing, and this vagabond kind of become this legend, and as and who knows, maybe he visited Hope Lick and Paint Lick and different places in between, because a lot of trains run across the state at that time, and a lot and there's a lot of trains that's defunct now. But yeah, I mean, I think that's probably my favorite origin story is this guy traveling around, this vagabond on trains, and have goats with him. That's a very neat story.
And it's just another one of those weird coincidences that there literally was a goat man in Popelick, between the 30s and 80s. Regardless if he's not the goat man as we perceive him, he literally was the Popelick goat man. And that's just another one of those things, like the like the paint lick crash, like the names coming up again. It's another one of those coincidences that I think is interesting. I think is a form of synchronicity, but I suppose one could argue that's just the nature of the legend developing, which is as interesting as it being synchronicity. It's cool to see those things take place. But that being said, there are other Goatmen sightings in Kentucky, and there are other Goatmen legends around Kentucky, some of which are honestly more well documented than the Popelick Monster. And it's a shame kind of that the Popelick Monster gets so much attention, especially considering all the deaths that the legend has led to, when these other legends are kind of better recorded than Popelick.
Yeah, and that's one thing I thought about when I was looking into this. I was like, why is the Popelick Monster so I guess so popular, unless it's where people have got killed on the trestle, and the news media out of Louisville and the statewide news media picked it up and did stories on it, and then other people kind of start talking about it, and maybe that's how it got popular. But yeah, there's a lot more other stories once you start looking that have a lot more eyewitnesses and things behind it, as far as people seeing things, than the Popelick Monster. So, the Popelick Monster is kind of a head scratcher once we start deconstructing it and looking at it. It's kind of like, how did it get to the point of where it's at?
Yeah, you are absolutely correct. And both of these legends and these instances that we're going to be talking about comes from Barton Noonley's Mysterious Kentucky, which we talk about a lot on the show. Um, Noonley calls these creatures Sasquatch, Goatman, Dogman. He terms them the Inhumanoids, which I think is an excellent name for them. And he has a book by the name of Inhumanoids, which I've not got the chance to read yet, but I'm sure when I do, it'll fill me with all kinds of information, which I'll come and regurgitate on the show. But he thinks that all of these creatures are related, and he believes that because in the events in Henderson County in the 70s with the Spotsville Monster and with different Sasquatch creatures, that these things were seen together or in the vicinity of one another. But there's an interesting case that Noonley talks about in Mysterious Kentucky that was reported to him in 93 by his neighbor, Mr. Stapleton. This instance occurred in the 1970s, but one of these Goatmen was witnessed by Mr. Stapleton's entire family, including his wife and parents. They described it as having long, shaggy hair with two short horns protruding from the forehead, hair-covered chest, abdomen, and arms, split hoof feet, and having yellow eyes, much like the Popelick Monsters described, almost exactly down to the yellow eyes. When Stapleton and others tried to approach the creature, it seemingly vanished before their eyes. They believed the house that they were living in at the time of the sightings was haunted. So see, it connects right back to these creatures being involved somehow with paranormal instances of, poltergeist activity, of UFOs, of things like that.
Yeah, it seems like anytime these things, it goes back to what we've talked about on previous podcasts. When we have a person who has an experience, they're likely to have experiences with other types of paranormal activity or of these entities. It seems like it kind of follows them, and then people who don't have these experiences don't have any of them at all. It seems like it happens to the people, multiple times, whether it be, UFO sighting, a cryptid sighting, or even like a haunting incident, maybe somewhere they're living or somewhere they've been.
Right. Absolutely. And this, and in Mysterious Kentucky, Noonley goes on to print paranormal researcher Jan Thompson notes that she shared with Noonley about the Goatman. Jan Thompson is, of course, a researcher that we talked about last episode with the Dogmen. She's also a researcher into what Noonley terms the Inhumanoids, these canid creatures, Sasquatch, Goatmen, and we're going to do a whole breakdown of the Inhumanoids and the various types of these creatures that are seen throughout Kentucky in an episode soon. Real quickly, though, I just want to take a look at Jan Thompson's research notes on one of the legends of the Goatman here in Kentucky.
The Goatman of Livingston County legend in Highlands, Kentucky goes all the way back to the mid-1840s when there was a working iron ore mine in the area. There were local iron furnaces in the area that would leave mammoth-sized holes in the earth to extract the natural ore. One in particular was dubbed the Red Hole and was famous for its size, its vivacious rust-colored dirt, and the dangers surrounding the opening. Supposedly, it was surrounded by quicksand, and after it was no longer in use, it quickly filled up with water. Its depth was reportedly unknown. Anything or anyone slipping on the muddy, steep sides of the hole would meet their untimely end. After its abandonment, stories abounded that the work crews had dug so deep that they had unearthed a slumbering demon. It's been said that many of the miners that had worked that particular hole mysteriously died just before they closed it. Moreover, the rumors attributed these deaths to arousing the quiescent devil. A few years afterwards, bright red eyes were seen at night by passing horse and buggies, and hoof prints were found in the dirt that were over 5 foot apart. Many attributed this to pranksters of the era, and were even accompanied by the rumors of a terrible giant ogre haunting the area that was half man, half goat. The stories continued over into the next century and were added as the sightings increased.
One belief is that it ceremoniously appears once a year on the eve of its awakening to wreak havoc on those close-at-hand residents, farms, and the nearby highway. According to local tradition, the Goatman goes on a rampage, killing anything in its path, eating it raw, then throws the bones back down into the infamous red hole. No one exactly knows what date this awakening took place on, but teenagers often go out there at night during various times of the year in hopes that they have the correct anniversary of its rebirth. Today, the area is all dried up, except for a small, lingering puddle. Ironically, this same area is still known for some unexplained sightings of something nearly 8 foot tall, partially hairy, with other parts of its body being dirty pink skin and scabby. Its description is more akin to a Bigfoot with an obvious skin deformity. It has been spotted in the Red Hole area, but mostly resides in the vicinity of the wooded area surrounding it. The undocumented reports are sporadic, and from what I've been told, there were several incidents back in the 1970s, with only one about every 5 years from then on. Some of these sightings involved the creature raiding some burn barrels in the back of a rural properties. However, more have seen it crossing some of the rural narrow roads, or just standing by the ditches and watching the witnesses drive by. This animal allegedly does not have horns growing from its head, nor does its hind legs bend backwards like a goat, but I'm sure it's been tied in with the Goatman sightings just to keep the legend alive.
So again, we have some type of cryptid that is, related to this Goatman. Whether it be a Sasquatch of some type or another type of inhumanoid, something hybrid between the two, who knows? But how many times have you and I heard these legends like this? And admittedly, that was more of a legend than actual recorded sightings, as Jan mentions in those notes. But how many times have you and I heard these stories of miners in the hills of Kentucky encountering the devil in mines? I'm pretty sure Sturgill has a song about it, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think it is mentioned in one of the songs. The song escapes me what it is, but yeah, maybe it's either him or Tyler Childress.
It may be
it's one of those
Tyler
guys.
Childers. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the guys from Eastern Kentucky. But yeah, that's like a common tale of miners seeing weird stuff down there in the mines when they're in the hills of Eastern Kentucky.
So that's interesting. And it's interesting how that connects to the legend of the Goatman. And back to this, in a way, the Goatman is much like the Dogman. He's kind of one of the most significant creatures in Kentucky, or one of the most significant cryptids. And the Popelick Monster is often cited as Kentucky's main cryptid. I would disagree with that simply because there's no recorded sightings. But he's famous here in Kentucky, and it goes back to those legends of those miners, like Jan was talking about there, of them possibly encountering something down in those caves and down in those mines, which goes back to the whole caves thing and how the phenomena, whatever it is, likes caves.
Right, and it kind of and if once you start like reading up on it, like these stories of the miners and even early settlers was having all kinds of, bizarre sightings in caves, in Kentucky and in this area, while these legends have formed, and people still to this day, have their sightings reported. And it seems like, although the creature is described differently, in a way, but the stories are all the same. If you take out the description of the creature and you just talk about the sighting or the experience someone had, even some minor descriptions with the eyes or what the creature may do to people, it seems like it's it's very similar in its nature, and I think although it kind of evolves and changes as time goes on, but these people still have multiple people who are not knowledgeable of each other or knowledgeable of the other stories have reported seeing things in caves and mines and in the woods of Kentucky, and there's some relevance to their sightings.
Yeah, for sure.
But moving out of Kentucky for just a moment, Goatmen are a common, more common than you would think, at least, phenomena around America. And a lot of these different Goatmen that we're about to talk about connect back in some way to the Popelick Monster and to Goatmen here in Kentucky. The first one we're going to talk about is the Maryland Goatman. And all of my information on these Goatmen come straight from Wikipedia. I'll include the links in the show notes, but you can totally just type in Maryland Goatman on Wikipedia, and what I'm about to read will pop up. But according to urban legend, the Goatman is an axe-wielding, half-animal, half-man creature that was once a scientist who worked in the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. So already, we're harking back to that theory on the Popelick Monster that he was a scientist who kind of went rogue. Also, Beltsville is mentioned in that first circus train wreck that we read from Louisville Halloween there. So we have two connections right there to the Popelick Monster with this Maryland Goatman. But I'll go on. The tale holds that he was experimenting on goats until one experiment backfired and he was mutated, becoming goat-like himself. He then began attacking cars with an axe, roaming the back roads of Beltsville, Maryland. A variation of the legend tells that the Goatman is an old hermit who lives in the woods, seen walking alone at night along Fletchertown Road. There we have hearkening back to the Goatman who traveled around in the wagon of goats. According to the University of Maryland folklorist Barry Pearson, the Goatman legend began long, long ago and were further popularized in 1971 when the death of a dog was blamed on the Goatman by local residents. Pearson says bored teenagers keep the Goatman legend alive by repeating the story and suggesting that the creature attacks couples frequenting the local Lover's Lane, subsequently stirring interest in sites like Fletchertown Road. So there's a lot there. We have the scientist theory that we just briefly touched upon in the origins part of the show. We have Beltsville, Maryland coming back up, which is supposedly where Colonel Schiltzneck was from in the legend of the circus train wreck. We have the Hermit, who is very much like the traveler. Let me see what his name was. McCartney, I believe. Yeah, Charles Chess McCartney. We have the dog killing, which is very much like the dog killings in the Highlands of Louisville. And this is the Maryland Goatman. What's your thoughts on old Maryland Goatman here and his connection to Popelick?
I find that the origin stories seem to match up to what has been told about the Popelick Monster. They're not identical, but they're very similar to say it appears like somehow the legend of that has got its way down here or up there one way or the other. It involves, but it's kind of, even the time frames kind of match up as far as when it was popularized, only there in the 70s and here in the 80s type deal. But yeah, in Beltsville, that looks like that is, pretty far up there, in Maryland as far as outside of it's outside of Alexandria and Bethesda and below Baltimore. So it's kind of in that, Beltway area. But I think, with like the Maryland story, I mean, it's weird. It's almost identical.
And there's, the mention of Beltsville, Maryland in the original legend. That's supposedly where Colonel Schiltzneck and the circus come from. There's so many different little pieces that echo from the Popelick legend.
Right. And I think somewhere maybe with the circus that Schiltzneck, I'm wanting to say that's got worked in to the Popelick story. As far as that was his circus, he's the one with the freaks. And I think that's kind of got worked into both origins of that.
I think so.
And maybe, he did have, because I mean, back then when the circuses was kind of more, unique and people got excited when the circus come to town, there was a lot of oddities in those circuses. And, and it really wasn't like the circus we have today. With, it's more of a organized and regulated type industry than it used to be.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And there's actually, I remember, and I don't remember what episode this was on. It was on one of those shows on ID channel type crime shows. And there was like something about an episode where there was like circus freaks and like there was like a murder amongst them, and like some of them like killed a bunch of the circus performers and stuff because they were kind of like they was like mutated in a way and they was used as a circus freak. It was it's
That's
kind of
pretty.
almost it's almost identical to this story aspects of it. It's
And
it has
see,
the same aspects of it.
like that's the thing. This story, the Popelick Monster, the Maryland Goatman, like this story is echoed over and over and over and over. And that kind of brings us to these other two Goatmen. There are actually two different Goatmen legends in Texas. One is the Lake Worth Monster. The other is the Old Alton Bridge Monster. The Lake Worth Monster, though, is particularly interesting because there are actual photos of this thing. Reports of sightings by local citizens of a half-man, half-goat with fur scales in July 1969 led to the belief that a mysterious creature lived in Lake Worth. Newspapers reported the alleged sightings, including one in which the monster landed on a man's car after jumping out of a tree, and another in which it threw an automobile tire at a group of people. Newspapers also published a photograph purportedly taken by the creature by Alan Plaster, and locals began driving out to the lake at night to get a look at it. Local police investigated the claims but found no evidence of the monster in Lake Worth and Greer Island area. According to one reporter, the Goatman legend was spread via summer camp stories where camp counselors told children to listen carefully and you'll hear his cry on clear nights like tonight. In a later interview, Alan Plaster commented on the photo described as a man-sized white fur ball that he took while driving past the Nature Center in 1969. Plaster characterized the sighting as a prank, saying whatever it was, it wanted to be seen. Since reports of the monster ceased when school resumed, many suspected the incidents were pranks carried out by high school students. In 2005, a Fort Worth Star-Telegram received an anonymous letter for someone who claimed to be one of three high school classmates who, in the summer of 1969, decided to go out to Lake Worth and scare people using a tinfoil mask. In 2009, Fort Worth, Texas Magazine published an incident about an unidentified man who said he had been the perpetrator of the tire throwing incident. So, we come back to this whole, that's been said many times, that these people arrive and these people pop up. What I thought was interesting, though, is the white fur ball that this guy took a photo of. And I'll include the photo of that in the show notes because it is interesting. But, this was described, or something very much like it was described right here in Somerset, which I think we may have talked about on an episode before, maybe not. But a woman was driving on what is that road with blackboard 69? Is that what that road is?
Oh, 39.
39.
Is it 39? Yeah. No, what is 461.
461. Okay.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So this woman is driving on 461 and is all of a sudden this white fur ball rolls out in front of her, just like is mentioned here in this guy's photo. And like I said, I'm looking at this photo now. It's a pretty intense photo. Have you saw this thing?
Yeah, I'm actually looking at it right now. I pulled it up.
Yeah, what do you make of that, man? That's pretty freaking intense. I mean, that to me looks like, the what was it? The skunk ape photos from Florida back in the early 2000s. That's a pretty close photo of whatever this thing is. And I don't see that. The guy says, Alan Plaster says of this photo that whatever it was, it wanted to be seen. But you'd have to have an awfully good costume in 1969 to convince somebody that close that you were some type of monster.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, that would take some work to get that type of costume. From what I'm looking at now, and I mean. Yeah, they put a lot of detail into it. I mean, that would almost be like back then, that would be the equivalent of a Hollywood movie costume.
Right. Almost like the Patterson Gimlin film, which there is a lot of a lot of controversy over now. But I still think that in that film, it would had to been like you said, Hollywood movie level. And then, I mean, even without the filming effects and stuff, I'm not sure that would look real in person. You know what I mean?
Right, right. And I mean, and of course, the photo is nothing like photography we have today with our iPhones and then things that can capture us in dash cameras. This was probably just taken with a snap and shoot camera or an old film camera they had laying in there, or something like that.
Right.
So and it's hard to say. Is this the only sighting of this, or has other people cited it?
No, according to the Wikipedia entry on the Fort Worth Monster, and admittedly, I've not done research like I probably should on the Lake Worth Monster. According to the article on it, it was reported in July 1969 quite a few times. There have been some other reports, but slowly sightings have died off, which is what led to people believing it was a hoax. But when Alan Plaster said that he thought it was a prank, and he says whatever it was, it wanted to be seen, he never really describes why he thinks it was a prank other than that quote.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I would wonder. I mean, if it wanted to be seen, the picture kind of shows it kind of just in a normal movement walking.
Mm-hmm.
And, when he says it wanted to be seen, I mean, did it do like a dance or something for him? I mean, I'm kind of wondering, what does he mean by that? I mean, because that could change the whole narrative of the story.
Right.
If he kind of elaborated on that.
Absolutely. Hell of a picture, though. Hell of a photo.
Yeah.
And so
I've
often
seen that before. That's
I hadn't either. Right. But that is interesting simply because talking about the Popelick Monster, we don't even have a confirmed sighting. Talking about this Fort Worth Goatman, we have a freaking photo of the thing.
Right. And and that kind of prospects to the public, like, why is that so popular? Why does people, come all the way here just to see it when there's no really much there's no sightings other than just the legend? And I guess the legend itself is maybe the intrigue.
Interesting, to say the least, and definitely something that I'm gonna look more into. But this other Goatman in Texas, the Old Alton Bridge. The Old Alton Bridge is also known as Goatman's Bridge. It's a historic truss bridge connecting the Texas cities of Denton and Copper Canyon. It's built in 1884 by King Iron Bridge Manufacturing Company. It originally carried horses and later automobiles over Hickory Creek. The bridge takes its name from the abandoned community of Alton, which was there between 1850 and 1856 and was the seat of Denton County. Locally, the bridge is known as Goatman's Bridge due to the legendary demonic satyr, and we'll get to satyrs here in just a little bit, of the same name, who is popularly believed to inhabit the forest surrounding the area. Alternatively, legend tells of a black goat farmer who moved his family to a residence just north of the bridge. A few years later, Oscar Washburn was known as a dependable and honest businessman, and North Texas endearingly began to call him the Goatman. But the success of the black man was still unwelcome to many, and Klansmen at the local government turned to violence. And Klansmen in the local government, that's important, I want to get that right, turned to violence after he displayed a sign on Alton Bridge, "This way to the Goatman's." In August 1938, Klansmen crossed the bridge and kidnapped Washburn from his family. They hung a noose on Old Alton Bridge and, after securing it around his neck, threw him over the side. When they looked down to see if he had died, the noose was empty. In a panic, they returned to his family home and slaughtered his wife and children. Locals warn that if you cross the bridge at night without headlights, you will be met on the other side by the Goatman. Ghostly figures and strange lights are said to appear in the surrounding woods, as well as reports of visitors being touched, grabbed, and having rocks thrown at them. This legend results in the area around Old Alton Bridge being popular among paranormal investigators. So that's a hell of a story in itself. But also, we have ghostly figures and UFOs there.
Right. The story itself is definitely taken off of something horrible that happened at the hands of horrible, stupid people.
Some of those that
And
burn crosses are the same that hold office.
right, exactly. And sadly, what year did this happen, Ben? What?
This the supposed incident with Oscar, I believe his name was, yeah, Oscar Washburn was the farmer's name. This supposedly happened in August of 1938. But it is a hell of a story beat that they tried to hang this man and they looked down and the noose was empty. You know what
That's
I
kind of
mean?
like that's like well, the hanging at Owl Creek, but it
Yes.
didn't, but
Yeah. But it
they
is
don't
very
spoil it
much
for anybody.
but it is very much a Twilight Zone beat, right? Like that's
Yeah,
very much like something you
yeah,
would see in a Twilight Zone. But the story, yeah, terrible, terrible story. But again, man, we have a person referring to themselves as the Goatman, a Goatman that actually lived in this place.
right. And that's, you know, this story has so many aspects to it that is just fascinating. And, and it happened then. And it's sad that as a country, and especially that area there, and I don't mean to offend any of our Texas listeners, but it hasn't evolved past that prejudice and racism, for one.
For sure.
But for a second is, you know, you're right. That's another goat man like we had here that, turned into this legend of a goat man that haunts the place or, is still there, presence there. Like his energy is still there and he's formed into this goat man. But there's another aspect to this goat man story that I find, it kind of, once again, it loops back to other legends. And they always goat men hang around bridges and like
Yeah. Yeah.
live on them or live under them. And what else, resembles a goat man? Like, is it trolls that live under a bridge
Trolls.
or,
Yeah. Yeah. You're
yeah,
absolutely right, man. And honestly, that's something so obvious that I hadn't even picked up on. But yeah, you're totally right. This legend of these creatures living under bridges or around bridges is absolutely an old legendary story beat. Hell, our logo, our cover photo for all of our social media is a bridge.
right, right, exactly. Yeah. It's the, and I think that's, and like, in this story, with here in Texas, it seems like this horrible act it become kind of like a legend, but one positive out of this legend is that those horrible acts was exposed,
Right.
but still wonder what come of this guy at some point.
And there is kind of a Candyman aspect to the legend as well of someone
Yeah,
returning from the grave to do vengeance upon those who are horrible fucking people.
right, right. And that's it does definitely have that to it also. I mean, because and hopefully they got what was coming to them, in the end. Maybe
Sounds like they were
hopefully,
killed by the Goatman.
right. Let's hope. Well, I probably
This
shouldn't
is
say
this is the
that.
one instance we pray that people were killed by the Goatman.
Right, right.
I'll
It's just
say it.
like, yeah. But man, we've had a little bit of everything in the show. We've had
We have, man. We have. And quickly before we wrap up, because I think this is an important part of the legend, is all the goat men of mythology. Like we
Mhm.
talked about in the circus legend, as was talked about in that article I read at the top of the show. There's Baphomet. Baphomet was a deity that the Knights Templar were accused of worshiping, and that subsequently was incorporated into occult and mystical traditions. The name Baphomet appears in trial transcripts from the Inquisition of the Knights Templar starting in 1307. It first came into popular English usage in the 19th century during debate and speculation on the reasons for the suppression of the Templars. This is the part really that I wanted to get to, though. Since 1856, the name Baphomet has been associated with the Sabbatic goat image drawn by Alephius Levi, which contains binary elements representing the symbolization of the equilibrium of opposites, e.g., half human, half animal, male, female, good and evil, on and off. On one hand, Levi's intention was to symbolize his concept of balance that was essential to his magnetic notion of the astral light. On the other hand, the Baphomet represents a tradition that should result in perfect social order. So Baphomet, was supposedly this deity that was worshipped by the Knights Templar. It's a half man, half goat. I'm sure everybody has seen the image of Baphomet by now. It's often associated with Satanism, which, if you look into the history of Baphomet, it's not associated with Satan whatsoever. But it is often associated with Satan. Baphomet, the image of Baphomet, or as of the Sabbatic goat, as drawn by Eliphas Levi, is often mistaken for Satan or used for Satan in a lot of instances. But really, this creature was meant to symbolize the balance of, man, animal, male, female, good, evil, on and off. And I do think it's interesting that Baphomet is brought into conversations about these Goatman entities, and in particular, the Popelick Monster.
Yeah, and real quick, the Baphomet, it reminds me, if as Ben was saying, if you don't know what Baphomet is, you can look it up on the internet, but I highly recommend that you use it with the phrase Baphomet, Michigan, because then you'll get the statue of Baphomet that the Satanic temple there tried to get put on state land since the Ten Commandments and other Christianity, I guess, formations or statues are allowed on public capitals. They wanted this one, and it's Baphomet sitting on a throne and has like little kids looking up at him joyously. Have you seen that, Ben?
Oh, yes. There's actually a great documentary, which name escapes me at the moment, on Hulu about the Church of Satan. And I may be getting those two wrong because there's a Church of Satan and there's Satanism. I get confused on it. But again, like we talked about at the top of the show, and this may lose us some listeners, it's whatever. I'm going to say what I think. It's my podcast. Satanism in America is not what we think of as Satanism. In the words of Duncan Trussell, and again, this may lose us some listeners, Satanists are some of the best people that I know. So, Satanism is, and in particular, this type of Satanism is a form of political combat. And I don't think a lot of people realize that.
And, in the people of Michigan, they're at the Satanist temple, and they built the statue, and they try to get it put on public land. It was nothing but come back to what we talked about earlier, but not the same sense, a troll. They was trolling the political right of the area. And they also try to prove a point, saying if you can put your, monuments here, so can we, by the definition of the Constitution. And yeah, you're right. The Satanist is not the cult people kidnapping things and killing them and sacrificing them. That's not what it is. It's more of a worship of the earth and the land itself.
And yourself. I mean, a lot of Satanism is taking personal responsibility. And I don't mean for Midnight Kentucky to turn into an ad for Satanism, but honestly, if we're talking about researching the truth and we're talking about pulling the truth out of these things that we're talking about, which I think is very important as an investigator in any sense, whether it be paranormal or the physical realm, you have to know what people believe. You have to know what people think. That doesn't mean that you necessarily have to subscribe to it, but you have to kind of understand people on a certain level. And like Stephen was saying, the Satanism as we know it is not, it's a worship of nature, it's worship of your environment, and it's worship of yourself, which sounds like a selfish thing, but do the research for sure, and do the research into Baphomet and why Baphomet really shouldn't be associated with Satan, because they are two different entities. But it kind of goes to this whole legend. It kind of goes to the legend of the Goatman. For some reason, Well, I know the reason, which we'll get into here in just a moment. But for some reason, the goat, or a half goat, half man, has been associated with Satan and with evil.
Yeah, and it seems like that has followed this Goatman story around. Like every instance of a Goatman story has an aspect of Satanism, which and it's kind of, once you start looking at the dates on these, it's all from the 70s and 80s, where a lot of these stories started getting traction, and that's during the Satanic Panic.
Right, exactly. And I guess this is kind of a good segue to go on to satyrs and fauns. Um, Satyrs and fauns are of Greek mythology, and that was mentioned in the Alton Bridge Goatman, that it's believed that Goatman is as they termed it, a demonic satyr. But satyrs are actually from Greek mythology. They are male nature spirits with ears and a tail resembling those of a horse, as well as legs of a goat. Early artistic representations sometimes include horse-like legs, but by the 6th century BC, they were more often represented with human legs. Comically hideous, they have mane-like hair, bestial faces, and snub noses, and are always shown naked. Satyrs are characterized by their ribaldry and were known as lovers of wine, music, dancing, and women. They were companions to the gods Dionysus and were believed to inhabit remote locales such as woodlands, mountains, pastures, and caves. They are often attempted to seduce or rape nymphs and mortal women alike, usually with little success. So we got a lot there, man. There's, that these satyrs and fauns they lived in remote locales, woodlands, mountains, pastures. They're nature spirits. And, even the seduction of nymphs and mortal women alike, that sounds a lot like what the Fae do and what alien abductions are. But before we get real into that, I want to talk about the horned god and Pan for just a moment, which are associated with fauns. The Goatmen, more commonly affiliated with satyrs of Greek mythology than the fauns of Rome, are bipedal creatures with legs and tail of a goat on the head, torso, and arms of a man, and are often depicted with goat horns and pointed ears. The god Pan of the Greek, these creatures borrowed their appearance from the satyrs, who in turn borrowed their appearance from the god Pan of the Greek pantheon. They were symbols of peace and fertility, and their chieftain Selenius was a minor deity in Greek mythology. And man, I don't feel like I have to say this, but where have we heard an awful lot about Pan lately, and about caves, and about Fae, and about all these things that we've been talking about all night?
Right here where we live, there's been a lot of talk about that in the last 3 to 4 years.
Yes. So, to me, I can't discount the fact that the Popelick Monster is essentially Pan. It's essentially this Greek god, or in appearance it is. And, as we've talked about with Hellier, as we've talked about with Penny Royal, something's going on with Pan here in the state of Kentucky. Pan is making his presence known here in Kentucky, and it's showing up in synchronicities. It's showing up in high strangeness events. It's showing up in all different kinds of ways. So the fact that the Popelick Monster is just another representation of this goat man, like Baphomet, or like the faun, or like Pan, to me can't be a coincidence.
No, it definitely seems like it's been a lot more discussion of Pan and things even more related, or of of things like that here in just even in our area. I mean, not just in Kentucky, but like directly where we live, like the next county over, and then a few counties to the east. And it seems like there's been some good documentaries done on those, but it's even caught the attention of locals who is went into the cave to try to destroy these altars and stuff that has been built in the caves.
So in finality this evening, let's get down to the high strangeness that is the Popelick Monster and all these weird synchronicities and coincidences we've dealt with in this investigation. And part of me does not think that we're done with the Popelick Monster. Part of me thinks that he's going to come back up for us in a little bit.
I feel the same way. I feel like the name's going to pop back up eventually.
Yeah. He's not something that dies easily. But what's your final thoughts on this, man? What's your thoughts on all these weird coincidences, synchronicities, stories from around America that bring us right back to Kentucky in a weird type of Twin Peaks way? What's your final thoughts on the Popelick Monster and all that he is and all that he encompasses?
This was an interesting case, and I know I've said interesting a lot when I was talking about this, but for me, stepping through,
but it really is. It's very interesting.
Yeah. It stepping through it and then kind of finding, really looking through the origin story and working. Really, I approach this the same way I would troubleshoot a technical issue. I started with the root of the issue, trying to find out when it first occurred, and then look at the origin story, work my way through it. And as I kind of worked through it and looked and then found the train wreck in Paint Lake and not Popelick and had the same aspects, so like, okay, that somehow formed from Paint Lake to Popelick, the legend come over to Popelick somehow. And then as we was talking tonight about, there's always like a Goatman involved in most of these stories. And then there's always an aspect of Satanism, which goes back to Baphomet. It's almost like all these stories, in a way, have a similar structure, even, at Popelick or even, somewhere else in the United States, Maryland, Texas. And they all kind of, in a way, resemble Greek mythology that probably come over here with the settlers, back when this country was formed. One thing I was not able to find was like any Native American talk about such creatures, because you think they maybe would have interacted or had some type of legends, but it seems like it was all,
that is a good point. Yeah,
like people who settled over here had these. And it's in the Goatman, and what I found the most fascinating one was the guy who traveled around. And it's almost like maybe this story followed him and it built energy over time. And one thing I do have to say about the Popelick Monster, and you're right, I don't believe we are done with it. The Popelick Monster itself is got more energy behind it because it's got no sightings, but it's got a high death count of people trying to seek it out. And that's where I think is the part of the story that this is like, there's definitely some bad energy that come from this legend. And it's kind of unique, as far as the story, because as we've stated, there's no sightings of it, but then there's a lot of people who's died trying to seek it out. And then as we started going through the origin stories, there's different origin stories for it. There's 3 or 4, and they all kind of match other stories that's similar across the country. And they all have the same aspects, but I don't think in any of these other places there's been this many people killed seeking out that version of the legend. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. What are your thoughts, Ben?
That was excellent, man. And I agree with almost everything there, if not everything. Like you said, we've used the word interesting a lot tonight, but I feel like the reason we've used that word so much is because what else can you say about this case? Because this is one of the only things that we've investigated that there have never been confirmed sightings of. Yes, there are confirmed sightings in other parts of Kentucky, in Henderson County. There are confirmed sightings in other parts of the world, or in other parts of America, like in Fort Worth, which that photo I'm still getting over. So there are confirmed sightings of this creature, but there's no confirmed sighting at Popelick Popelick Creek or on the Norfolk Southern Train Trestle. So it's interesting that this creature got so big so fast, and is such a predominant legend in Kentucky. But I can't discount all the roads we've been down that have seemingly presented us with coincidences and synchronicities in this investigation. Very much like a lot of the other investigations we've done, whether it be looking into the Hellier stuff that Greg and Dana Newkirk put out, the investigation that's still continuing there, or the Pennyroyal thing, which spun off of Hellier, or the James Bunch case, which presented us with a lot of coincidences and synchronicities. There are too many coincidences and synchronicities here for me to believe that nothing is going on. I guess that's what I'm saying, because I do believe that synchronicity is a road marker, kind of telling us that we're going in the right direction. So I do think that there's something here. Do I think that there's a flesh and blood entity that lives at the Popelick Creek? No, I don't think so. I think that that's not to say that the entity isn't real or that people haven't saw it, but I don't think that there's a Goatman that goes to sleep there and wakes up there and lives there. I think that there's something interesting in the fact that, for all intents and purposes, the Popelick Monster is a version of Pan, the thing that's talked about in Hellier, the thing that's talked about throughout Kentucky at this moment, and that is so big in Kentucky at this moment. I think there's something in the fact that this creature is seen in an area, or is supposedly in an area, where there are so many sightings of dogmen, Sasquatches, UFOs. There's been so many animal mutilations. That's interesting to me. But kind of like you said, we've said interesting a lot in this investigation. And I think that's simply because we started this, or at least I started this, thinking maybe we might not even have enough to make a full episode about the Popelick Monster. But geez, man, once we started digging, there was so much and so many coincidences that it just, like, it didn't even stop when we started recording the episode. We still kept finding coincidences as we were talking about the stuff, as we were recording. So like I said, when we started into the final thoughts, I don't think we are done with the Popelick Monster. I think that this is going to be one of those cases that keeps coming up for us, and keeps presenting us with those little coincidences and little synchronicities along the way. On the Baphomet issue, Baphomet is a symbol of balance. So, and it's a symbol in a lot of ways of, what you're seeking, you will find. So, perhaps the reason that we find the Popelick Monster being such a negative entity, claiming all that negative space, killing people or leading to the deaths of people, more people than can be counted. Perhaps it's because we go looking for monsters. Perhaps it's because when humanity goes out into the unknown, we go looking for something to terrify us. And, it is terrifying. Those deaths are very unfortunate, very tragic. But perhaps we go looking for the monsters, and that's what we find. That's the energy we put out there. That's what we're looking for. And I'm not saying that, the Popelick Monster is or isn't an entity or a real thing. I don't know at this point. I know that what we found surrounds us with weird tales of high strangeness and weird coincidences and weird things like that. But I honestly couldn't tell you if the Popelick Monster is real or not right now. Do I think that there's something out there? Yeah, there's something out in the Highlands area of Louisville. There are too many instances of high strangeness out there, whether, it be the Popelick Monster or the Dogman or the Sasquatches or the mutilations or the UFOs. There's just too much high strangeness in that area for something to not be going on. And, regardless of the Popelick Monster or something else, that's something we'll continue to look into. And hopefully we can bring you something more than interesting in the next episode. But, the reality is we will probably never find the answers to these questions. But it sure is fun to ask. And I'm sure that in upcoming episodes, we will have more questions and less answers, which is what we're doing here.
Man, that was great. That was a great final thought. I loved it.
So I think that's going to do it for this episode of Midnight in Kentucky. As always, follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, midnightinkentucky.com, the Ransom Letter Publishing YouTube channel. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, you can hear us in all our old familiar locations, wherever you get your podcasts, but we are also now on the Ransom Letter Publishing podcast stream. Check us out over there, and check out the Ransom Letter Publishing podcast for more weird strangeness. It's going to be an interesting ride on that podcast, and I'm happy to finally be getting that out. Check out the TeePublic for all your Midnight Kentucky merch, t-shirts, caps, masks, hoodies, whatever you want. We got with our signature brand of weird Kentucky strangeness on it. And check out the Patreon. If you're digging what you're hearing on the main feed, we get way more into the things we've talked about tonight, whether it be investigations, how politics play into the paranormal, all sorts of weirdness. We have several different shows over there on the Patreon, and we have the sticker club, we have the t-shirt club. So check that out. There's something for everybody, several different tiers. And just so we can say we said it one more time, Stephen, give it to them.
Stay off the train trestle.
Stay off the train trestle, ladies and gentlemen. For Midnight in Kentucky, I'm Ben.
I'm Stephen.
Till the next moon rises, night owls. Good night.
You've been listening to Midnight in Kentucky,
a Ransom Letter Publishing podcast.
Join us on Twitter and Facebook.
Or get in contact with your questions, comments, or stories of high strangeness
at midnightinkentuckypodcast@gmail.com.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock.
What do you know about Dr. Dunch?
Based on the unbelievable true story.
I can't make sense of this.
Dr. Death.
Dunch has 2 deaths that we know of.
Starring Joshua Jackson with Christian Slater and Alec Baldwin.
I am going to fix you.
All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock.